Hey there, everyone. This is Ted Lacksonen, the country thinker, bringing you the next episode of The Eagle Has Crashed. Well, we've almost wrapped up the year of 2029, and today we move on to December, which we'll have in two parts, so that means within 2 weeks we're going to be moving on to 2030. So I don't have anything else further to add, so I guess instead of wasting your time, let's just get right to the story. Low-hanging clouds reflected the muted orange glow of Columbus on a cold night in early December. Kevin Davis kneeled in a dusting of snow in front of a ground-level exhaust grill near the middle of the north wall of a large metal building that housed a tool and die company. He wore a black polyester knit ski mask and hunting vest, which he patted to make sure the Union propaganda device was still there. Kevin removed the screws of the grill with a battery-powered screwdriver and then tucked the tool into a deep vest pocket. Finally, he removed the 4-foot by 4-foot grill by yanking on the horizontal slats with his gloved hands. Kevin leaned the grill against the ribbed aluminum exterior of the facility. As he prepared to crawl into the ductwork, he heard a voice holler from the parking lot at the front of the building. "Hey you! What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Oh shit," Kevin said with a puff of steam. He popped to his feet and saw the dim glow of a cell phone in the hand of a man he presumed was the owner and manager of the company. He turned to his left and ran through the crunchy grass, past the end of the building, and crossed a field about 50 yards wide. The neighborhood behind the shop was separated by a rusty, 4-foot-high chain-link fence. Kevin vaulted himself, but his right foot slipped in the snow-dusted grass. He tumbled headfirst over the barricade, and the fencing ripped his jeans and sliced into the top of his left thigh. Kevin landed on his right shoulder bone, and his feet flipped over his head, completing the somersault and landing him flat on his back with a thud. A dog began barking inside the small, white, 1920s-era house, so Kevin climbed back to his feet and ran past a wheelbarrow and a stack of firewood, through an open gate that led to the side yard. With no traffic, Kevin darted across the quiet street that had been heavily and poorly patched. He passed through 2 more yards, using gates when available and tentatively scaling fences when necessary. The cut on his thigh began to burn. Kevin jogged to the middle of the next street and looked around. "Cool," he said. He turned to the left and ran past a dozen old homes. The red and blue lights of a police cruiser shone from the first street he had crossed, and a searchlight lit the yards of the neighborhood. Kevin darted up a concrete walkway and bounded up a broad set of wooden steps. He crossed the deep porch and slowly opened the aluminum screen door. It squeaked loudly in spite of his best efforts at stealth. He turned the brass knob of the heavy oak interior door, and the rusty metal hinges squealed, making Kevin cringe. "Damn it," he muttered. He closed the door slowly but noisily, turned, and walked up the open staircase in the center of the turn-of-the-20th-century home. His groaning steps carried him to the top landing, and he trotted to the apartment door to the left. He rapped softly with the back of his hand 3 times. There was no response, so he knocked harder. A high-pitched dog's yipping echoed from within, followed by the sliding pitter-pat of little paws on a hardwood floor. Kevin removed his ski mask and waited nervously. He looked down to the windows on either side of the front entry. The red and blue lights outside were drawing closer. Come on," he urged. The apartment door opened until it was halted by a security chain. "Who is it?" asked the diminutive silhouette of Grace Mercer. "It's me, Kevin Davis." "What in the world are you doing out so late?" "Let me in. I can explain everything. Just hurry." All right, she said, unfastening the chain and opening the door. Kevin squeezed in as soon as the opening was wide enough, and he pulled it closed behind him, pulling the knob out of her frail, wrinkled hands. "What's got into you, child?" the tiny old woman asked with a furrowed brow. "You in some kind of trouble?" Mercer and the Davises were all members of the Oak Street Church, and Grace had known Lucy since she was a baby. Mercer also knew about Kevin's knack for getting into trouble, and had advised Lucy to reject his marriage proposal, a fact Lucy had never shared with Kevin. "Nah, Miss Mercer, I ain't in no trouble," Davis said, standing next to her in the entry. Although he wasn't tall, only 5'7", he was a full head taller than she. Mercer scanned him from head to toe as he walked into her dark living room. "What kind of crazy get-up is that?" She put her hand on her hip. You're lying to me, Kevin Davis. You been up to something you oughtn't have been. What, breaking and entering? He stopped and turned to face her. No, Drugs? No! Mercer spotted the blood-soaked pant leg and put a hand over her mouth. Lord have mercy, child, you're hurt. Now I know you been up to something. She waved at him with the back of her hand. But we'll get to that. First I gotta clean you up. You get in the bathroom and take your pants off. Oh, Miss Mercer, that ain't necessary. Don't be shy. I raised 3 boys. Ain't nothing I ain't seen before. Davis hung his head and shuffled to the small hallway bathroom and turned on the light. Mercer followed and retrieved a washcloth from the linen closet and rubbing alcohol from the medicine chest. Kevin unfastened his belt buckle as she turned the hot water tap on full. Now you're going to tell me what you've been up to, or I'm going to make it hurt. Kevin laughed as he kicked his pants onto the white tile floor and sat down on the toilet seat. I've had deeper cuts. I can take a little pain. I know you can, sweetie. That ain't what I meant. Either you tell me what's going on, or I'm going to talk to Lucy. His smile evaporated. You wouldn't. She raised her eyebrows and nodded slowly. Mm-hmm. Kevin covered his freckled face with his hands. All right, I'll tell you. He lowered his hands and placed them on the sides of the toilet seat. I'm trying to save the country. The workers, at least. Mercer tipped her head to the side. Did I hear you right? Kevin Davis is going to save the country? Her bony shoulders bounced up and down as she laughed. I heard some whoppers in my day, but that's a good one. She wiped away a tear with her finger. Now, how exactly is Kevin Davis going to save the country? Talk on the street, Miss Mercer, is that the government's losing control and things could get real bad. Yeah, I heard that kind of talk, she said, wiping the gash on his thigh with a wet washcloth. Don't like it one bit. Folks in Washington just keep fighting, and they ain't getting nothing done. I didn't really understand what the big compromise was about, but now that it got shot down, they got to start over. But all they're doing is yelling at each other. It's like, I don't know. He shrugged his shoulders. Like they're paralyzed when we need them the most. Go on, she said, reaching for the rubbing alcohol. He winced as she applied it with the washcloth. As she dabbed the wound with alcohol, Kevin spilled the beans about everything, from the meeting with Joe Flanagan, to successfully unionizing Green Wing Industries and other companies, to the night's failure to plant another propaganda device. Everything, that is, except the money. Kevin, what you've been doing is against the law. You can go to prison for what you done. Yeah, I guess, but it's for the good of the country, don't you see? What I see is a man with a wife and 3 lovely children who needs to think of them first. You ain't 18 anymore, Kevin Davis. You can't go getting yourself thrown in jail. It's only 3 weeks till Christmas. Daddy in jail. That would be a heck of a present, wouldn't it? Kevin sighed. You're probably right. Mercer stood up and retrieved gauze and tape from the medicine cabinet. You're darn right I am. He chuckled, then looked up with puppy dog eyes. You ain't going to tell Luce, are you? No, but you should, especially with that cut. Gonna be hard to explain that one. Naw, Miss Mercer, he said with an impish grin. I do plenty of stupid stuff. I'll think of something she'll believe. The old woman closed her eyes and shook her head. When you gonna learn, child? Lucy Davis was in her cubicle typing furiously when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned in her swiveling chair with a start, then took off her headset and put it on her desk. Good morning, Lucy. Good morning, Miss Preston, Lucy said, eyeing a large stack of manila folders under her boss's arm. Lucy's shoulders dropped. Oh, Miss Preston, you can't be serious. I'm afraid so, she said, pulling out the stack of 15 folders from under her arm and handing them to Lucy. Davis received them with both hands and looked at them as if they had fallen from outer space. What am I going to do with all these? Lucy asked. I can't give the clients I have 15 minutes, and that ain't fair. I haven't placed anyone in over 2 weeks. Preston leaned against the partition wall at the entrance to the cubicle. You're not the only one having trouble, she said, shaking her head. There's too many coming in and too few going out. With Ohio's unemployment at 12% and rising, I'm afraid this is how things are going to be for a while. Davis rubbed her face. What are all these people going to do? Preston sighed. I don't know, Lucy. Just be thankful you have a job. I thank God every night, she said. But truth is, I feel guilty about it sometimes. Oh, Lucy, don't ever feel guilty for having a job and doing it well. I can't help it, Davis said. It's not fair. I mean, my husband hasn't worked in 8 months, even though he wants to. That's just not fair. I know, Lucy, I know. Life isn't fair. Yeah, but it ought to be. Preston smiled. Lucy looked down at the folders in her hands. What a Christmas present. There isn't a lot of cheer this holiday season, sad to say. Lucy looked up. It can't get any worse, can it, Miss Preston? Lucy's boss opened her eyes wide and rubbed her forehead. Gosh, I hope not. Chief of Staff Pirelli led the president into the SATCOM room, a small conference room with a large screen on one wall. President Maynard leaned against the mahogany table, facing the screen, while his chief of staff took a seat behind him. Maynard's straight, sandy hair was slightly disheveled, and the sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled up unevenly. He scratched the underside of his small paunch and thought back to the worryless days when he'd had washboard abs as a lacrosse player at Brown, and his combination of looks, charm, and wit made girls as easy to gather as apples in autumn. Maynard's sentimental musings were broken by the sound of a technician at the back of the room pecking at a keyboard. The screen began to glow, and the grainy image of International Monetary Fund President Han Ngo began to appear. The president's thoughts lurched 30 years to the present, and he folded his arms across his chest as Ngo's image became clear. Good evening, Mr. President, if I have calculated my time zones correctly. Ngo smiled, lifting the light brown skin up his high cheekbones. Yes, you got it correct. Ngo rubbed his chin and stared at the president. Maynard stared back into the IMF president's dark eyes, set so deeply that Maynard felt like his gaze was getting sucked into a sinkhole. Maynard looked down and scratched the back of his neck. So what good news do you have for me? Ngo ran his hands through the gray sides of his otherwise black hair. I'm afraid I don't have any. Maynard looked up but closed his eyes. You've got to be kidding me. We need the IMF's help, Mr. Ngo. He opened his eyes with the shocked look of a parent upon learning a child's been charged with a felony. Ngo shook his head. I'm sorry, but the magnitude of a bailout. Maynard winced as he halted the international banker by holding up his hand. Can we call it something else? Maybe short-term liquidity facility, or some other term you financial types use. Ngo smiled. Very well. I know you political types fret about the optics of terminology. But getting back to my point, I'm afraid the IMF will be able to provide the United States with the loans it has requested. How much can we expect? Ngo's jaw clenched, and he pulled the president's gaze back into his. None. What? Maynard exclaimed as he slapped his hands onto his head. That's insane! This is a global economy. We can't let that sort of thing happen. Let me know who I need to talk to, and I'll shake something out of that bush. Ngo shook his head. China, Japan, and Russia are adamantly opposed, and no one is going to do anything without them. Maynard scowled. That doesn't make any sense, since they're the ones with the most to lose. What's their reason? What is the expression you Americans use? Ngo scratched the underside of his chin. They feel it would be throwing good money after bad. The president took his hands off his head and folded his arms tightly across his chest. They're digging their own graves. Ngo scowled deeply. Mr. President, the U.S. economy is still nearly twice the size of China's. The amount of resources that would be required to make a difference in your fortunes would be devastatingly enormous. He paused and stabbed at the air with his left finger. And you're asking for help just as nearly every economy around the world is turning downward because of your profligate spending, which has deprived everyone of the capacity to help. Everything is connected, Mr. Ngo. America is too big to fail. Ngo squinted and shook his head. Even if we could help you, with the failure of your big compromise and your political party still squabbling, the international community has no confidence that your debt problem is being addressed in a manner sufficient to accomplish anything substantial. And again, the amount needed to make a difference is enormous. America isn't too big to fail, Mr. President. America is too big to save. The IMF president's figure became grainier as pixels darkened. I'm sorry, Mr. President, but the United States is on its own. Okay, so that's the end of today's episode, and next week will be the final segment of 2029. As always, if you're enjoying this and would like to help the author out by purchasing a copy, you can get it from my website at clearpeakpress.com, and you can get an autographed copy there. There is a spot where you can give instructions to seller, which would be me, and just request an autograph, and I will gladly do so. It's also available in both paperback and ebook from Barnes & Noble and from Amazon. It's also available as an ebook from the iTunes store, from the Sony store, Smashwords, and other retailers. So, until next week, hope you have a good week, and we will see you again and wrap up the year of 2029 of The Eagle Has Crashed.